Okay, the reading for this week is the next part in our series on pre-modern, medieval, early modern, and Meiji period Japanese civilization, culture, history, and so forth. Today we'll be reading excerpts from The Way of the Samurai, or the Shidō, by Yamaga Sokō. And Yamaga Sokō lived during the first part of the Tokugawa period. He was born in 1622, died in 1685. And you remember that the Tokugawa period follows the period, the Sengoku Jidai, the period of warring states, right? And the unification of the country under the Tokugawa Shogunate begins around 1600 and continues all the way to 1868 in the collapse of the Tokugawa period, Tokugawa Shogunate, the overthrow of the Tokugawa Shogunate, and the beginning of the Meiji period and the Japan's process of westernization and modernization and so forth. So this is the first part of the Tokugawa period. Yamaga Sokō, born in 1622, was a Confucian philosopher and expert in military techniques and strategy. He was particularly concerned with the fate of Japan's warrior elite in an era of extended peace, right? So the Tokugawa is sometimes referred to as the Pax Tokugawa. It's a period of relative or stability and peace for 268 years or so. After the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 1638, Tokugawa Japan would enjoy more than 2 centuries without any large-scale wars or uprisings. So this Shimabara Rebellion is one of the sort of glitches in the Tokugawa period of warfare. We'll discuss the Shimabara Rebellion in class. But after it ended in 1633, we have more than 2 centuries of peace in the country. In his mid-16th century work, The Way of the Samurai, mid-16th century work, Sokō, that should say mid-17th century work, that's a typo there, cross out 16th, replace it with mid-17th. He lived during the middle of the 17th century. In his work, The Way of the Samurai, Shidō, Sokō outlined a role for samurai in Japanese society that combined moral cultivation and civil responsibility with military preparedness. Okay, and once again, this English translation is taken from sources of Japanese tradition, edited by William Theodore de Barry, Carol Gluck, and Arthur Tiedemann. This is from volume 2 of that work. I'll put the link to that book below so you can purchase and follow along. And I'll also include the link to the PDF worksheet that we're using here, which was compiled by somebody at Columbia University. All right, here is the excerpts from the Shidō, or The Way of the Samurai. And before I read that, though, let me read these 5 study questions on the worksheet. Question number 1. What does Yamaga Sokō consider the most important duties of the warrior, of the bushi, of the samurai? Question 2. Why does Sokō feel that the samurai are uniquely prepared to assume moral authority in society? And remember that the samurai, the bushi class, is at the top of the traditional Confucian social hierarchy of shi no ko sho, with the shi on the top, the bushi on the top. Why does Sokō feel, I already read that. Question number 3. What kind of education do you think Sokō would have recommended for a samurai? Okay. What kind of education does he promote here? Question 4. How do you think you would have responded to Sokō's argument as a Tokugawa period farmer? So as a no member, right? A farmer, peasant, as an artisan. So shi no ko is the artisan, right? Or as a merchant, who are theoretically at the bottom. Shi no ko sho is the merchant. How would you respond to his arguments as a member of those 3 lower class society members? And question 5, how do you think Sokō's vision of samurai values and behavior differs from images of the samurai common in popular culture today? So you can compare the samurai that is implied in this essay with, for example, that Tom Cruise movie that I never saw, but is often ridiculed by historians. Okay. Here is excerpts from the Shidō by Yamaga Sokō. For generation after generation, men have taken their livelihood from tilling the soil, or devised and manufactured tools, or produced profit for mutual trade, so that people's needs were satisfied. Thus the occupations of farmer, no, artisan, ko, and merchant, sho, necessarily grew up as complementary to one another. But the samurai eats food without growing it, uses utensils without manufacturing them, and profits without buying or selling. What is the justification for this? When I reflect today on my pursuit in life, I realize that I was born into a family whose ancestors for generations have been warriors, bushi, and whose pursuit is service at court. The samurai, the bushi, is one who does not cultivate, does not manufacture, and does not engage in trade. So he doesn't do any of the things that the no, ko, and the sho classes do. But it cannot be that he has no function at all as a samurai. He who satisfies his needs without performing any function at all would more properly be called an idler. Therefore, one must devote all one's mind to the detailed examination of one's calling. Okay, so he's addressing this problem that emerges in the Tokugawa period of the role, the function of the bushi samurai class is obvious in times of war, right? It is to fight, it is to wage war on behalf of the emperor or the shogun or whoever one is fighting for. But in times of peace, this becomes more ambiguous, right? The role of the peasant, the role of the artisan, and the role of the merchant is very clear. But what is the role of the bushi, the samurai, in times of peace? And he seeks to clarify that question in this essay. The business, and here's his explanation. The business of the samurai, the bushi, is to reflect on his own station in life, to give loyal service to his master if he has one, to strengthen his fidelity in association with friends, and, with due consideration of his own position, to devote himself to duty above all. So those four things are the tasks of the samurai. However, in his own life, he will unavoidably become involved in obligations between father and child, older and younger brother, and husband and wife. So domestic affairs he will inevitably become involved in, although these are also the fundamental moral obligations of everyone in the land. The farmers, artisans, and merchants have no leisure from their occupations, and so they cannot constantly act in accordance with them and fully exemplify the way, the Tao, the Confucian way, Tao in Chinese. Because the samurai has dispensed with the business of the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant, and confined himself to practicing this way, this Confucian way of the Tao, if there is someone in the three classes of the common people who violates these moral principles, the samurai should punish him summarily, and thus uphold the proper moral principles in the land. So upholding proper moral Confucian principles is the duty of the bushi, of the samurai, and punishing the other three common classes, the peasant, the artisan, and the merchant, when they do not uphold those virtues, is also his task. Since this is the case, outwardly he stands in physical readiness for any call to service, so outwardly he's ready for war, and inwardly strives to fulfill the way of the lord and subject, friend and friend, parent and child, older and younger brother, and husband and wife. Within his heart he keeps to the ways of peace, but outside of himself, he keeps his weapons ready for use. So you remember that only the bushi class, only the samurais are allowed to have weapons during this Tokugawa period. The three classes of the common people, the peasants, the artisans, and the merchants, make him their teacher and respect him. Okay, so he's the sort of moral leader of the people. By following his teachings, they are able to understand what is fundamental and what is secondary. Okay, and this translation is of a passage that is included in the Yamaga Sokō Bunshu, pages 45 to 48. All right, that is all for this excerpt. We'll talk about it in more detail in class, and we'll discuss the study questions that relate to it, and I will see you then. That is all for now. Goodbye.